Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we're going to go to New York City and talk about peace. And we're going to talk to somebody who really knows a thing or two about it because she's been a peace studies professor since, oh my goodness, long time. She's been retired a while, but she was certainly one of the most eminent peace educators anywhere when I got into the business. Her name is Betty Reardon, and she used to teach at Teachers College at Columbia University. I expect she's been retired a while because she's about my age. In fact, I think you're a couple of years older than I am. But hello, Betty Reardon. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Meta. Nice to meet you.
You know, it's
and I'm older than everybody.
All these years, I've heard of you, and I was once in the audience when you were giving a talk, but I've never met you till now. So this is our chance to get acquainted and to sort of compare notes, I guess, because you certainly are the leading person when people talk about peace education. They always say Betty Reardon. So I don't know where to start with this, but I kind of look forward to a conversation about the business of being a peace studies professor, and particularly teaching teachers. I think you were teaching in a college that was preparing people to become teachers. And so you must have been preparing them to smuggle peace issues into their curriculum in some way. Is that right?
More or less. It's rather complex because Teachers College is a graduate school of education. And we do get some classroom teachers, but they tend to be in the minority, or were when I was there. And the people that came into our classes in peace education were people who were going to be professors, probably of education, but maybe international relations or whatever, because our program was affiliated with the International Studies program. And or activists. We trained a lot of people who were going to work for non-governmental organizations and to do what we call peace learning in civil society. And I think my own position through the years has been as a scholar activist, walking that very thin line where you're educating for activism, but the subject and position of your activism per se can't become part of your teaching as such. But it was a learning experience in itself.
You know, that's I've never had a conversation about that, but I know exactly what you mean. There is a fine line, or it's more like walking on eggshells or something, where you have to be. I remember feeling quite sure that there were certain things that I must not do. For example, you wouldn't wear a button to class when you're teaching. You just wouldn't, right?
Right.
Now, how do we know that? There's no rule book. Nobody ever told us that you must not wear a button to class, promoting some cause or other while you're teaching. But we just know that. And I never used to test it to try to find out how far I could go. But I, in fact, I had some difficulty sometimes keeping my my work as an editor of a peace magazine completely separate from the academic work, because that's a place where, of course, things did overlap a lot. Did you ever have much of a conversation with people about what are the norms, because these are sort of things I think we have to know in our gut, and not because anybody told us what the rules are?
Well, it wasn't, we didn't look for rules per se. We looked more to the actual purposes of what we were doing when we were the facilitators of the learning of others. And the point was to make the learning environment as open as possible to the full possibilities for the learning that the learners could do individually and communally. And the way formal education is structured, if the facilitator is to intervene with a position in that, the weight of the facilitator, given the fact that in most other classes they were listening to the professor and taking notes, it weighs much too heavily to achieve the pedagogical objectives you are reaching for, which is the development of self-guided critical learners, and to give them some skills and some basic information that can help them to reflect on what their position is on an issue, and then hopefully how they as responsible citizens can react to that. So it was always not the rule and norm setting as the refinement of process, of developing more precise modes of inquiry, learning to facilitate interactions in a way which would make the learner comfortable enough to reveal what they want to discuss, what they want to put on the table, and creating a kind of model of discourse that you hope could be taken into the public square.
Well, that is actually a little different. I don't think I was thinking that often in terms of running my classes sort of like a workshop training on how to be a teacher, so much as a regular. Normally I give lectures and so on. Although I did have a seminar where we did role playing and things like that in that one course. But it sounds as if a good part of your courses were at the level of asking people to engage with particular issues and talk about policy and how to put it across and so on. Is that sort of the way you ran courses more?
Well, it was usually they were organized substantively around a problematic. And the job of the facilitator was to develop the reading list, lay out a framework for the inquiry into the problematic, and set up the general inquiry that would be the substance of the course. Mm-hmm. And we were very focused on substance, and the readings were very important. And you could tell by the quality of the discourse how much of the reading had been done. I'm a junior high school teacher. I learned to teach by teaching 13 to 15-year-olds. And I learned by about the second year, if you couldn't engage them, forget it. And I found that engagement was actually a good learning mode for most learners. And it is in adult education, it's large. I worked somewhat in adult education for a while as well. And it always seemed to me that everybody could take something away, whether it was the package that you brought or not. It was something that was of value to them. And so that was the most important thing to me.
Were you the only person, or was there a whole program in peace education?
Well, for a time, the program at TC started when I was there doing something else at the college, and I met a tenured professor of science education who was very concerned about the nuclear issue. And as a matter of fact, he was doing a nationwide search for me, not knowing that I was 2 floors down from him. And he had put a graduate assistant in charge of finding me, and she found me. And so then we started to work together, and he said, we just have to do something formally in the curriculum. The education has a responsibility about this issue. Mm-hmm. And so we talked to other faculty members. I wasn't on the faculty. I was there working in an organization that had an office there. But we talked to other faculty members, and there was a lot of interest, but nobody seemed to want to give the time except for Professor Willard Jacobson, a very distinguished professor of science education.
Is he the person, sorry, the one who was chasing you, trying to find you?
Yes, right. And then Professor Douglas Sloan in the philosophy of education. And so the three of us instituted the first seminar that became the core of the course. And through the years, it developed into a specialization in international education. And we also established there a resource center. And we did non-formal workshops and so forth on weekends, intensives, that kind of thing. And we established the International Institute on Peace Education, which was a summer intensive, became residential. The first two were at Teachers College, and from then on until now, they happen all over the world. Now,
it's one out of Washington, D.C. now, isn't it?
Well, it's in the suburbs. The man who was the coordinator, Tony Jenkins,
yes,
teaches at Georgetown.
We had a talk show.
Yeah, he told me that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in many ways, I was alone off and on for years, but there was a lot of support from students who were very committed to the program and to the methodology and the purposes. And shall I put it this way? Not so much interference from the rest of the institution that we couldn't do it.
Okay. That's sort of the way I felt. I was given kind of, okay, go do what you think you're going to do, but we won't look. Yeah. Tell me what year that was. When did you start this program?
We started... Well, it was about 1981 when Willard and I started doing brown bag lunches, and a lot of students came. So they said, now we can start a seminar. We've got our students. And so that was the fall of 82. No. It was in 81 that we actually started, because 82 we were already working, because I remember a bunch of us from the program went together to the Peace March on June 12th, 1982.
Well, I was there too. So, I remember you.
We met.
Only a million
other people. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, you actually got a couple of years head start over me, because I think ours started about 1983. And my program was at one of the suburban campuses of University of Toronto. It's in Mississauga. And so it's completely an undergraduate program. So they get a bachelor's degree in peace studies at the end. But so I didn't have graduate students in the program. And I expect that probably makes a big difference, because my students what I did was I scouted around and looked through the calendar, the university's list of courses, for all the courses that look as if they might have something to do with peace and war. And it could be in psychology or history or philosophy well, the problem was mostly the political science people didn't appreciate it, and they wouldn't play, and they wouldn't let me count political science courses toward the major, because they feel, here I was, who do you think you are teaching courses about political affairs, because we're the guys who own that.
Yeah, I know there is a significant difference between most undergraduates, I would say up to senior year, and graduate students. And of course, the range of ages of graduate students. Even though an undergrad, we have untraditional, or called non-traditional students and so forth. They're pretty much of an age category. And they have a very different attitude toward learning and toward their courses. So there are differences that have to be brought to bear on the pedagogy that we use at the graduate level. Tony teaches mainly undergrads, and he does a lot of what we did. I think he's a great teacher. But also in the realm of political science, one of the problems the whole field faces that you must know is that at first it wasn't taken seriously. It wasn't considered to be a real academic discipline by some, and some peace studies people fought very hard to put forth the research base of the field and so forth. And finally, it is now accepted. But the international relations field and the political sciences were the ones who put up the biggest walls that we had to scale. Now, I always remember a friend of mine when I first started out of the junior high school classroom on the development of peace education. I was working with the World Law Fund, and I worked with a lot of teachers. There was a teacher who was going to do his doctorate in political science. And he went to his first political science professional meeting and switched to education. He said everybody was trying to argue against everybody else, and they weren't trying to find a common ground or common truth. And he hadn't expected that. He had expected to learn about how do you do politics in a humane way for a humane society.
Well, I that was sort of my experience. Anyway, and that's all right, because I think I'm a sociologist, and I think sociologists also have a problem with being imperialistic. We have our little empire, and now that's crumbling. If you'll notice, in the last several years, there's not much sociology anymore. Everybody goes off and does things in a department of communication studies or cultural studies or something that, cognitive studies or something that even computer. Well, I'm reading a book by a sociologist at Penn now, a guy named Damon Centola, I think is his name. And he's a computer science kind of guy, because it's looking at algorithms and things like that. So you never know. But I think that sociology had always wanted to kind of become a domain, and it's not holding up as well as it used to.
Well, none of the disciplines are. We're losing the core of liberal education. I think it's a great tragedy. I've always been what I call a transdisciplinarian. Okay. I believe that undergraduates should be firmly formed in a discipline because they learn a way of thinking. They don't have to use only that way or stick with it for the rest of their lives, but they learn something about systematic thinking, how you outline an inquiry toward a certain purpose within that discipline, the questions you raise in your research and so forth, that are skills and ways of thinking that can apply to other areas. But it just seems it's for most students now, it's just topics. And, I think that would be an interesting subject, and it's information. Mm-hmm. And I don't talk to that many anymore, just kids in my family, but and they're bright as can be. And I try to push. Why don't you do a little course in history or take a course in poetry, for heaven's sake, But
remember there was a paper by Ken Boulding, on what it would take to make peace studies into an academic discipline, and he had 3 or 4 criteria. I think the most interesting was that everybody who gets say a PhD in peace studies to become a professional peace educator there's a certain body of knowledge, a list of classical a canon of literature that the student should have mastered more or less. And you can examine that person and see whether they've read those articles and books. And if not, then they have to go back and do some more work, because that's what it takes to be a professional. You have to have some familiarity with at least that list of readings and so on. Well, I've forgotten the other two criteria that he had, but it had something to do with the notion that it should be possible for any professional in peace studies or peace research to examine a candidate by seeing what they have read and whether they've read the right list of things. So I think we're probably are there, although I'm not so sure anymore, because that canon right now, as you've mentioned, is looking pretty fragmented. I'm not sure that that there are many people who would have a depth knowledge of that whole list, but they'd be specializing in one corner of it or another, history or theology or something,
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. For a while, it was true. There was more or less a canon in peace studies. Everybody knew Boulding and Galtung, etc. And also the canon, and as it grew, what became recognized as essential works were very much part of shop talk when we were together as at a professional meeting, around at the bars, whatever. There was this common base that was discussed and critiqued, and I'm sure that it is good to critique the canon, but to critique it, you have to know it, and to build upon it, even if some of it is later repudiated. It just has to be known. And I think that's happening in peace studies as well, that we're losing it.
Well, I remember, when I was a graduate student in sociology, I remember I had a shelf of American Sociological Association, the ASR and the AJS, as we call it, the two different central journals that were most important. And they filled about 15 feet of shelf space when I finally stopped subscribing. But I don't think there is anything equivalent to that in peace studies now that would be regarded as the journals that you have to get published in, or you should try. That's the one you would want to be published in, and because that's what a good researcher, peace researcher would want to probably read the most.
Well, we do have the Journal of Peace Studies, and it's still. There are a couple of journals, I think.
I haven't read either one of them in years.
Yeah, well, they're still there.
Okay.
They're pretty good. Yeah. Okay. Some of my best friends have pieces.
Okay, so now you started this thing back in 81 or so. That's a couple of years ahead of me. But they closed mine down when I retired in 1997 because frankly I didn't mind that they closed it down, because I knew that if they kept it going, they didn't really know what peace studies was, so they would just hire anybody to make up something, to teach, and it wouldn't be very good. And I wouldn't want to have people graduating with peace studies degree without having a really good background. So I was okay with having it, collapsed, but it hasn't collapsed everywhere. And maybe, are you following that? Because I haven't even been. I mean, I edit Peace Magazine, which is not peace research, but it's much more topical about what's going on in international events these days. What is going on, would you say, in peace research and peace studies academically that I'm missing? Because I've just confessed to you, I haven't read any of those journals lately.
Well, I don't know that much either. I know something about what's happened at Teachers College in the 20 years since I have left. I know a little bit about what some of my friends that I talk to do, but I don't have an overview of the field because I still write somewhat in theory on peace pedagogy and so forth. But I shifted more over to the work that I was doing for years while I was doing peace education, because they were integral one to the other. But the gender and the past few years, it's mainly been activism. But I was always an activist, and I think we have a common acquaintance in Mary Thompson, whom I worked with for years and years in the disarmament movement, and the gender issues and women's human rights and so forth. So unless people in peace studies are doing something about disarmament or gender perspectives on climate or something like that, I don't have that knowledge of the field, except, as I say, I do know something of what has been going on at Teachers College, and I have glad to say they still maintain a peace education network.
Are they still have a degree program?
No, well, we just had a specialization. It was never a degree program. And they still have specialization. I think it's human rights, might be human rights and peace, but the core discipline of the person who was most involved in doing those courses, and some of the courses that I designed initially, is a human rights person. She's a very distinguished educator in human rights, and she teaches at Louvain and various places as well. But she's not tenured. It didn't have the value to hire someone and a tenured position to do those courses. Although a human rights person came in right after me, and many of the courses were absorbed into international education and changed a bit. But what I understand, and I've sat in for her a couple of times on Zoom, just twice. The other time was a meeting. But when she was away, she couldn't do her class, so I did the class. So I know, what readings she assigns and so forth. So I'm pleased with what's there. I really wish they had a degree program in peace education. But what's there is turning out some really wonderful students. I've been working with several as interns through this year.
Really? You mean people that you taught when you were teaching, or people who are still in the program?
No, people who weren't even born when I was teaching. But they are now doing graduate work at TC, and the woman who does the human rights program got me some interns because I needed them for the work that I was doing on Afghanistan, and so I have a team of 3 graduate students from TC, and they're extremely committed and extremely bright. And I would be delighted if they would have been delighted to have them as students had I been there.
Okay, well, now that's another difference I think I'm sensing between your students when you were teaching them and mine, because I was teaching undergraduates, and they were, of course, they didn't know what peace studies was before they got into it, but it sounded okay. But they never became activists, and it wasn't really a program that was designed particularly to try to nudge them to be activists. I was always a little disappointed that they didn't catch the bug, where they would want to join various movements, but hardly anybody ever did. And I think that is even true for the students who were coming out of the program on the main campus, which was pretty distinct from ours. That you could take courses in one or the other, but not many people did. So I think that our program was not as much oriented toward policy issues, current policy, world affairs stuff, as it might have been, and certainly that's the kind of thing I do with the magazine and with what I'm doing now, this project called Project Save the World, which is not just peace studies, but several other global issues that are related to it. So is that really the case, that because you were teaching graduate students, they were already people who knew what kind of jobs they'd be looking for, and they were mostly policy-oriented jobs?
Not necessarily.
No.
Some of them, some of the people in the program, from what I understand, aspire to jobs at the World Bank or something like that. But a lot of them want to go to work for CSOs. And that was their intention from the beginning, and to do educative work. Or even in, some of them are in business, where they are in the education sector of a corporation or something like that. And, Meta, I don't think that peace education or peace studies produces activists. I think the activists are self-produced. And what happens is that they get some tools to use, they get some knowledge that's relevant, but it is, whatever it is that makes an activist is within the person. You just don't put it in there by, you don't instruct them. You can give them organizing tools and skills for mobilizing populations and so forth. But the will to do that is something else. And I know a friend of mine was saying, oh, peace education has been so successful. Look how active these young people are. And I said, sorry. I mean, I'd love to take credit for it, but by gosh, it had nothing to do with anything we had to do. It was within those kids themselves, what they see, what they value. And we're just lucky that that this generation came along, so.
Okay, but yours did go become activists, right? Mine didn't.
Well, quite a few, but not all of them. Many of them are, they would be sort of teacher activists or scholar activists. Yeah. But I think everybody is trying to do something, even if it's just signing and circulating petitions. They just don't read the newspaper.
You're touching on a subject where I had a fight with a dear friend of mine. I won't name her because she's somebody who's devoting herself now in her senior years to trying to recruit young people to become peace activists. And I was a little too critical. I said, you're going to fail. You can't do that. If they're going to become activists, they will organize their own peace movement, their own groups, and great, then you can boost them and support them and help them. But if you try to get them to join a bunch of old people in their groups, it's not going to work. So she got mad at me. I think I maybe was too tough with her, saying that it was going to fail. But my experience is that it's really the time you want to catch somebody to recruit them to your committee or your program or your activist, committee group is when they're 65 and retiring, and they are ready to do something new and different, and they've got several years ahead of them. So those are the people who are good candidates for us.
Well, they're good candidates to put in the time with us, but I'm not in total accord with you. I think we need those youngsters because they see the world differently. And we have to know how it's going to be their world. And when it comes their time to be us, they're going to have to do the same thing. Step back, bring in the young, work it out together. How can we give you what we know? How can we tell you about the mistakes we made and so forth? But let us help you in whatever way we can to push forward for your future. And I've always been eager, whenever I did anything, I always wanted young people as part of it. And I always, because I think we have to keep looking at the future, and we can't look at the future the same when we're in our 90s as we can in our.
That's true. It's a question,
20s.
though. To me, it's a question of who owns it. If they think we own it, they don't want to play.
No, but we have to tell them we don't own it.
Well, yes, but take, for example, ICANN, because the most powerful movement that the peace movement has put forward in the last 30 years is ICANN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And those were young people. They did it on their own. And they recruit us. We don't recruit them. And I think that's the way it ought to be.
Yeah. Well, I don't care. I don't care who recruits whom. I just care about having that dialogue.
Okay.
And yeah, I still would like to snag a few for some of the things that I do.
Now tell me about what you're doing, because we just talked about peace education, all this, and you say you've been working on Afghanistan. I want to hear more. I didn't know what you were doing.
Well, it started with a conversation with a friend of mine just a few days after Biden's announcement. I had gotten a letter from an email letter from a friend in India that she sent out on behalf of some women in Afghanistan within a day or so of the announcement. And they said, this is bad news for us. My friend and I had both had the same reaction at the beginning. Oh, it's great that war is finally ending. But then we also began to think about what are the implications going to be? And we didn't see, as it started to unfold, we didn't see any real care being taken as they moved out to assure the rights of women. So we started to think about what we could do, and we sent a letter to the White House. We got a lot of other women to sign it, enough recognizable names so that we had a contact set up for us in the gender office of the White House, who were very facilitative in a sense. And they said, well, if you know women who are at risk, who need to be out that we don't know about, send us their names and contacts and so forth. We'll try to work on that. So to make a long story short, it never led to anything. So we've been doing it ourselves. And what we have, the list was mainly people known to a group of about 12 of us who started to work together on a regular basis. And they tended to be academics, professional women, journalists, doctors, etc. And so we finally got a name after months and months of working called the Advocates for Afghan Women Scholars and Professionals. So what we have been trying to do is get placements for them in the United States and in other, it turns out we have to work on other countries too, because the visa situation is it's a nightmare. And so it takes just weeks and weeks, sometimes months of work to get one woman an appointment, have somebody at that university following the case along and so forth. We have managed a few, and we've done some collaborations with other groups who do a similar work. Some of our people have gone, as I said, to other countries, but Some have gotten out.
How many would you say? Maybe I'm not quite sure what to ask, whether it's like a ratio of the women who need desperately help to get out. What fraction of them have succeeded?
I would say minus 1%.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's even worse.
We had nearly 200 names on our list, and we have about 8 placements.
Oh my God.
So, but we're sticking with it. We're not giving up, and we look at very different ways. And then some of our group, about 6 of the group from our advocates group, went with, I think there were 12 women went to Kabul about 3 weeks ago, and it was it was put together very quickly. But it was very useful because we got a lot of information that we didn't have, even though we have contacts with people on the ground. Having these women go and be able to report back, and they had really quite positive interactions with some of the younger people from the Taliban, and the major
officials. These are government leaders, or
well, I don't know what they're apparently. They look to me from the photographs to be like guys in their 40s. They were second-tier people in the foreign ministry and the Ministry of Education. Mm-hmm. They went, the event that they went for to celebrate and make contact was the reopening of the girls' schools, which, as you know, did not happen. But they spoke with members of the ministry who said, just straight out to them, the old guys at the top are the ones who are standing against this. I have daughters. I want them to go to school. And as soon as we can convince these old fellows to lift this ban, we're ready to open the schools in 24 hours.
Wow, that is interesting. And I hadn't heard that.
Well, this is one person who was telling it to them, but they had a feeling that he was not alone. Mm-hmm. And also, they had 1 or 2 press conferences, but they had a really big one at their hotel. And I saw the pictures of it, and there's 2 whole rows of these men sitting there listening. They're all from the government.
To the delegates who from
your group. They were listening to, through the translator. They all spoke in English and then were interpreted. And they were, they didn't look uncomfortable or kind of, we're here because we have to be. They looked like, well, we came to find out what you people have to say. So.
Well, that's the thing, I mean, as I have to agree from all I've seen, and it's not much in Canada. I've not been following it as closely as I should, but the newspaper always says the people that worked for Canadians in Afghanistan, put their lives at risk, are hiding in basements, waiting to have Canadians come and evacuate them, and they're not doing it. It's just very slow, and if there's anything at all happening, so that isn't working. And it sounds like if your group can't make it happen either, then what are we going to do? Well, all I can think is we've got to place emphasis on how to somehow influence the old guys.
Exactly. It's the old men at the top all over the world.
I know. Well, so what are we going to do? I mean, I just had the last talk show I did was 2 days ago, and we were talking about how it's just the same as if you're talking about you have a bully in the schoolyard, and how do you teach this person to cooperate and stop behaving badly? What do you do about thugs? And that's really where we are in the world in terms of a war now, with the threat that they're making ominous sounds about going to use nuclear weapons if they start losing this war. I don't doubt that they might. But, if peace studies has anything to contribute, it ought to be some recommendations about what to do about these guys, and they're almost always guys, uh, who are, the cause of all of the anguish that we're going through. And I don't think we have anything useful. If they ask me what to do to influence Putin, I don't know. Do you?
I don't know either. But I did have a strategy years ago, but no one would cooperate on bringing it into being. I determined that we should acquire a large island mass somewhere and invite them all to live in the most luxurious situation possible on this island mass. And each one would have 3 months out of a rotating cycle to be king of the hill and call all the shots and be the great leader. And they could, and they could have parades, and they could, wear their uniforms if they wanted or not, and state banquets, and they could play the roles to each other of visiting diplomats. It could be everything they wanted, but contained somewhere so the rest of the world could get on with the business of being human.
Okay. I mean, yes, of course. If we could get them to just please get on the plane, we're ready to take you there.
Well, we surround the plane with beautiful young women because I know that all these guys go to those parties and so forth, and that will get them there.
No, it's not the young women. By the time they're that old, it's really piles and piles of money. All they want is all of these yachts. They all seem to. I've been reading all these things about how big their yachts are. How big does a yacht need to be, for heaven's sake?
Yeah. Well, we could have wheelbarrows full of currencies being taken onto the plane as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, we laugh, but, I have a million great ideas of what to do to try to help prevent wars. And all of them are such good ideas. Any one of them would be useful. But once the blood is shedding, I'm out of ideas. I don't know how to protect those people in Mariupol. I mean, they're being killed as we speak. And I have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
And peace research should have an idea or two about what to do.
There is quite a discourse on nonviolent resistance and so forth going through PJSA now. And there is some action on the ground, but it is so minimal in relation to the organized violence. And I think for most people, the response is that the situation is so, asymmetrical that people want to help in whatever way. People who ordinarily would just say no war, no weapons, are willing to have the United States and others send lots of weapons into Ukraine.
I can't blame them. I mean, if I were in Mariupol right now, I would probably hope that somebody comes with a great big gun and gets me out. Yeah. I probably would. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so too. But I haven't read enough about what actually transpired between Guterres and Putin.
I don't know either. And I read something yesterday by Richard Falk, which surprised me because he was not quoting Guterres, but speaking as if Guterres is the only one who made sense. But what he was saying was very similar to what I hear a lot of my peace friends say, that it's really all the fault of the U.S. and NATO, and they shouldn't have done it. Well, that's past. that certainly there were bad decisions there. I agree. But, what do you do now? And that's where I don't see that anybody has any suggestion. One guy I interviewed 2 days ago said, get them to talking. Well, Zelensky's perfectly happy to talk, but and they were talking, but that didn't go anywhere. So I don't think anybody's got any good ideas. They have a bottom line. I think Zelensky's bottom line of where he's willing to concede is, he's happy to accept neutrality. Well, that's great. But then you still don't have a solution to the two, the Donbass republics or Crimea. And then even if he conceded that right now, I'm not sure that Putin would go along with it, because I think now Putin's really got his eye on the idea of just plain flattening the whole country. I mean, he's got revenge and all humiliation and all these other dynamics working that make it, twice as difficult to if we just if they would do what we said before the war, we might have helped. But I don't have any good ideas right now at all. And it's
maybe you and I don't have any right now, but I'm sure there are other people in the world who must, because I can't believe that there isn't some way to bring forth a resolution that will at least end this violence. And that's the first objective is to stop the killing, whatever we can do. And I've been thinking of that patriarch who is so patriotic and so, such a tool of Putin. If the main religious leaders of the world could get to him and send a delegation to Moscow.
The Pope wanted to go. I think he's backing out, but the Pope was talking about going and seeing.
Yeah, at one point he never, but I think he feels that he needs more than him. Yeah, and I think he does too. I think it should be but a huge.
Putin didn't want to see him anyway. Wouldn't let him in.
Yeah.
What do you do about that? I don't know.
Well, somebody somehow has to get some Russian Orthodox groups have to get through to that patriarch. That I think is one possibility. But anyway, what I'm saying is, I think we should continue to try to think of something. Don't just say it's impossible, because it may be, but to not have fully exhausted every single possibility. And I know that I don't know all the possibilities,
Right. Well, I'm not giving up and saying nothing, but what I'm saying is, well, when this is over, I've got some good ideas how to get us out of the next mess. So it's like in between wars, I think peace activists have something useful to say. And I'm writing about, trying to develop some changes in the United Nations and, multilateral institutions that I think would have to be changed now.
Well, I'm thinking of going back to look at the Clark-Sohn plan and have.
I'm sorry, the what plan?
Clark-Sohn, World Peace Through World Law. It's a plan that they published they were working on it from after the war, but the version that I read and used was sometime in the mid-60s, and they just take the UN Charter and you see side by side their revisions. Some of them are outdated, but the essential things are still there, and that's compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court. This was before ICC, a standing peace force, and a staged general and complete disarmament. They didn't do anything about nuclear weapons in that, and they allowed military forces sufficient to maintain civil order. And there are some real flaws in it, but at least they did the thinking. And that's what I think people have to start doing now.
Mm-hmm.
And my feeling about what we should be pushing for is two things, because I think they're interrelated. One is to just put our knees in the chests of permanent five to get them to accede to the nuclear ban treaty and to renounce the veto. And if they renounce the veto, they would unparalyze the organization.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Liechtenstein's initiative is an opening for civil society to start to work on that. And Jonathan Sachs' proposals about Ukraine, in which he asked us for a suspension of the veto while the Security Council seriously negotiated about possibilities for peace, with the veto suspended. And he also talked about dispatching peacekeeping intervention forces and other things. That what Jonathan put forward, I thought, was eminently practical and doable now. And then with Liechtenstein on top of that, if civil society could come in, and with the 1982 mobilization being observed, we've got a great opportunity to launch something like this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. And one good thing happened just this last week. I think they've accepted, and with the agreement of the U.S. and Russia, accepted the notion that anytime a country uses the veto, they have to call within 10 days. They have to call a meeting of the General Assembly. The trouble is, the veto still is a veto. The General Assembly can't override the veto. So if they could do that, we'd already have a solution in hand, because
they can act around it. What about the Uniting for Peace resolutions?
Okay.
They dispatched forces.
Yeah. Our time's up. We're only getting going.
We only started to save the world. You have a lot of work to do, Meta.
I'm trying, and I'm delighted to know how much you're doing. It's great to meet you, Betty, after all those years.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. It was really wonderful to speak with you.
I've enjoyed every minute of it. So blessings. All right, carry on.
Blessings to you. Bye-bye.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, sometimes more. This is episode 447. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get to that website, look around, because we have conversations going on all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down. Share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. I'll see you there.